Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Just want to quickly check. Can you see me and hear me properly? If you can, maybe you can just put it in the chat or just put a thumbs up. Yes? Very nice. I can see the reply now. Thank you so much. Yeah, so first of all, let me first thank all of you for joining today's webinar. So I'll be the speaker for today's webinar titled Introduction to Agile. My name is Jeremy and I'm the Business Development Manager from Cybiant. So the reason why I've chosen this particular topic about introduction to Agile is because ever since the pandemic, we've noticed the importance of business agility, right? Business agility basically means the ability for teams or organizations to adapt to changes. So it could be market changes, it could be consumer behavior changes, so on and so forth, with the help of strategy, new technology, or maybe just a new way of working, right? So with Agile, basically, is one of the widely adopted approach globally for organizations and teams to use as a way to better respond to all those changes, right? Which is why I thought it would be good for me to introduce Agile for those of you who might not be very familiar with Agile or who have not heard of Agile before. Okay. So before I dive into the topic of Agile or the content of Agile, please let me introduce our company first. So our company, Cybian, is an organization that develop and specialize in developing, delivery, and execution of organizational best practices. Okay, which is through all those best practices, we provide training and consulting services to help companies make better decisions. So our portfolio and expertise includes several best practices ranging from Agile, of course, project management, next generation technology, which are like robotic process automation, machine learning, big data, and also the adoption of ISO standards. Okay. So for today's webinar, we will look at 6 key topics about Agile. So first, we will first discuss about what is Agile. So over here, I will share with you the underpinning theory of Agile, the values of Agile, the principles of Agile, so that you have an overall idea of what Agile actually is. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the origin of Agile, how Agile came to be. We'll also look at the differences between the waterfall approach, which is a more conventional project management approach compared to the Agile approach. And then we'll look at the benefits of Agile. We will also introduce some frameworks of Agile so that after the webinar, you can actually explore more by yourself. And lastly, how to get started with Agile. So we share some ideas how you can learn more about Agile. Okay. So because of the time constraint, so during the presentation session, if you have any questions, we really appreciate if you can keep those questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, we will have a Q&A session then. Right. So without any delay, let's start with the first answering this question: what is Agile? Okay. But before I do that, maybe let me just launch a poll so that to keep this session a bit more interactive and just to know a bit about all of the participants as well. So I just want to ask this: are you familiar with Agile? So if you can just quickly answer the poll, just click yes or no. I'll give you maybe another 3 or 4 more seconds. Okay, so let me just show the result to everyone now. Okay. So as you can see, most of you have no idea. I mean, it's not familiar about Agile, but some of you are actually familiar with Agile. So for those of you who have not heard of Agile, this will be a good session for you. Okay. So, sorry. What is Agile? So basically, Agile can be explained as an iterative approach to project management that helps team deliver value to customer faster and provide business agility to better respond to change. Of course, just by reading this definition, you will not be able to have the full understanding of Agile, but just bear with me, I'll explain more in the following slides. Okay. So I would like to ask you to look at the first line first. It says that Agile is an iterative approach to project management. So basically, an iterative process means to work in a way that again and again to try to improve something, right? That is what we call it as an iterative process. So for Agile, for a project, you can basically split them into multiple iterations, okay? And at the end of each iteration, you can actually release a potentially shippable product or maybe just an additional feature to the software itself. So to elaborate that, just look at the slides below, and you will see that there's a figure there which shows three loops: sprint 1, sprint 2, and sprint 3. So each loop represents an iteration, okay? So you will start with the first one first, sprint 1. You will plan, you will design, build, test, review, and at the end of the iteration, you will launch the potentially shippable product to the end user to gather feedback and only work on the second sprint again, so on and so forth, until the project or the product is fully developed or delivered. So this is essentially how Agile actually works. Okay. So Agile also has its roots in software development, but throughout the years, Agile practices have also flourished in many business lines, such as you can find marketing projects or using Agile, human resource project, or even in contract management as well. Okay. So Agile is also an alternative approach to the waterfall methodology. Basically, waterfall methodology is a more conventional or traditional project management approach. So I'll move on to the next slide. So in order for us to fully understand the concept of Agile, we will also need to look at the differences between Agile and a more traditional type of project management methodology, right? So what is waterfall methodology? Basically, a waterfall methodology is a linear, sequential lifecycle project management approach. So what we mean by linear and sequential, if you look at the chart below, so it means that you can only move to the next stage, let's say from a requirement stage to the design stage, once you have fully completed the task in the requirement stage. And that is why we call it as a linear sequential way of working. Okay. So this approach has its origin within the manufacturing and construction industry, but it was also introduced in the software development in 1970. So let me elaborate slightly more about how the waterfall methodology actually works. So from the start, you actually spend time to make sure that requirements and designs are correct. So that is done from the start itself. So that is slightly different from the Agile approach. Agile allows you to actually gather requirements, add more features as the project evolves, okay? But for the waterfall approach, you have to actually gather all of that from the start of the project itself. So high-level requirements are concrete before design begins. So once all of the tasks are done under the requirement stage, only you can proceed to the design stage. So design should be completed before people begin to implement it. And each phase must be 100% complete and correct before proceeding to the next phase. Right? So as you can see, also why this method is called the waterfall methodology, because just like waterfall, the water can only flow from the top all the way to the bottom, right? It's a sequential linear way of proceeding things. So the drawbacks of using this method is because it follows a rigid workflow. So there's no feedback loop if in case you would like to use the feedback from the end user to further improve the overall project, right? So this one actually doesn't really allow that. And the other drawback of the waterfall approach is that it might take longer time for you to complete a project because you can only begin the next stage once you have completed all the tasks in the current stage, right? So which is why when this waterfall methodology was introduced in the software development domain, a lot of people actually recognized that this sequential process was not working, right? Because a lot of projects were actually failing. So in 1970, when Dr. Winston Royce, who was a computer scientist at that time, introduced the waterfall approach, he also realized that there were flaws stemming from the fact that the verification or the testing phase can only start at the end of the project, right? So he realized that this way of working may not be suitable for software developers which is why he actually proposed a do it twice approach where the software can be designed, implemented, tested at smaller parts. And then with that, also incorporated feedback loop so that developers can use the feedback from the end users to further improve the previous milestones of the project, right? So this is how the iterative and incremental way of working has led to the growth of Agile. Okay. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, you will see that the first step, you will see that that is called an iterative way of working. It represents an iterative way of working. And at the bottom of the slide, you will see the boxes. So that represents the incremental way of working, where the product will slowly evolve as time progresses until a product is fully developed, right? So more features, more improvements can be added onto the project itself as time evolves. So the agile approaches use the idea of iterative and incremental development to allow detailed requirements to be defined later as a solution evolves. So you can add more, maybe some improvement points or some additional features that you would like to add into the project. Agile allows you to do that. Okay. So now that we have learned the brief concept of what Agile is and what waterfall approach is, I would like to also launch a poll again just to ask all of you, do you think that in general we can say Agile is always a better approach compared to the waterfall approach, right? Just let me launch the poll first. Okay, so again, you can just answer yes or no to the question. I'll give maybe another 4 or 5 more seconds. Okay, let me project the answers to the screen. All right, so most of you actually answered yes. Agile is always a better way of working compared to the waterfall approach. Only 3 of you answered no. Okay, so maybe let me just explain it a little bit better. So the answer to that is actually no, because it actually depends on the application or the project itself. Okay, what I mean by that is that if you have a project that the requirements need to be well documented and clear, or the project, the technology is understood and not dynamic, it doesn't really change much, and there are no ambiguous requirements for the project itself, then it might be best for us to use the waterfall approach. The reason being is because waterfall approach is actually much more simple to use and also provides a more structured way of working. So you easily find this approach actually from the construction industry, because in construction, they rarely change the requirements that was already agreed upon from the start, right? Building will be constructed according to the drawings, according to the design plan. On the other hand, if you have projects that the requirements are allowed to be defined later as the solution evolves, or the demand or requirements may change during the development, and there are many uncertainties, especially when you're doing something that you have not done before. For example, you could be developing a new software that you require the feedback from the users to improve the project itself, then it might be best for us to use the agile approach instead. Okay. So the iterative and incremental way of working was actually widely adopted back when the many of them realized that the waterfall approach wasn't working for software developers. But the term agile really came into focus when the Agile Manifesto was introduced, right? So in 2001, 17 thought leaders actually came together to try to figure out why so many software development projects were failing, and they are trying to uncover better ways of doing that. And with that, the Agile Manifesto was created, right? So the document that you see on the slide, that is the Agile Manifesto. It's actually a very simple document. As you can see, there are 4 values that says that we should value individuals and interaction over processes and tools, all the way to responding to change over following a plan. So I will explain a little bit more in the next slide. And then at the bottom, you will see those are the 17 individuals who have contributed to the creation of this Agile Manifesto. Okay. So if you'd like to know more about the history of Agile, you can Google it. And you can also easily find the original version of this Agile Manifesto online as well. Okay. So These are the four key values of Agile that really differentiate Agile from the traditional approach. Okay? So in the Agile Manifesto, it says that we should value the items on the left over the items on the right, right? However, it doesn't mean that the items on the right don't have value at all. It just means that if you wish to follow the Agile way of working, we should focus more on the items on the left. Okay. So for the first item, it says that we should value people and interactions over processes and tools. So with Agile, we should focus on more interaction and more communication over following a rigid process flow or rigid workflow, right? Because it is through this interaction where business stakeholders and developers can truly understand the point of view from each party, and at the end of the day, can create something that the user actually wants. And the second value says that we should value working software over comprehensive documentation. So for the waterfall approach, typically we'll start with heavy documentation, where you will outline all of the requirements, finalize the tasks of the project, and all of the features before you proceed to the next step. And usually this way of working will take a lot of time. And then sometimes at the end of the day, you might create product that is irrelevant anymore, or maybe features that is really outdated, right? So the agile way of working really promotes or encourages us to really focus our time and effort on producing a working software or a working product so that the end user can actually see and experience the product itself and provide their feedback. And the third value says that we should value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So for the waterfall approach, we typically start involving the client at the start of the project, where we discuss about the requirements, the features, and basically all the tasks that are needed to be done within the project. And during the project, we rarely involve them unless there's a change in the work that might deviate the entire work plan that was really agreed upon at the start of the project. Then only we will involve the customers, right? But for the agile way of working, we really need to emphasize on customer collaboration, because that is how we can learn from the customer, learn from their feedback, and improve the overall project. And last but not least, we should value responding to change over following a plan. Just like what I've explained earlier, the waterfall approach really focuses on following a plan. But for the agile approach, we need to be able to embrace change. That's how we can improve a project itself. Okay. So on top of the four values of Agile, there are also 12 principles of Agile. So the list that you see here, basically, this is a summarized version of the original 12 principles. And these 12 principles are only added after the creation of the manifesto, basically to act as a guide for teams or organizations who would like to adopt the Agile way of working. Because as you can see from the four values, basically it's just four simple sentences. And this one actually provides more clarity, right? So let me start with the first principle. So it's about customer satisfaction. So we should always satisfy customers through early and continuous delivery of a valuable software, or you can easily replace the word with product, valuable product. Okay. And the second principle says that we should embrace change. So in Agile, if you're managing an Agile project, you should always embrace change. And the third principle says that we should deliver value frequently and also at a shorter time scale so that the client can actually, or the end user can actually experience or see the solution to provide early feedback. And the fourth principle says that we should work together and break silos of your project. Basically, for the agile approach, the developers and business stakeholders should really work together throughout the project to understand each other so that at the end of the day can produce something that the end user actually want. And the fifth principle says that build projects around motivated individuals. So for agile, we shouldn't micromanage, and it is the responsibility of the project manager to make sure that he or she create an environment that can motivate and also encourage the team members to voice their opinions or also to give suggestions. And the sixth principle says that basically face-to-face interaction is the best way of interacting. And with that method of interaction, you can avoid miscommunication or also reduce the time spent on answering and answering questions with emails or with maybe a chat system. The seventh principle says that working software is a primary measure of progress. So it doesn't really matter if you spend so much time working on a particular project or particular task, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't translate into a working software or working product, then it won't really matter for the end user, right? Because they can't actually experience it. And number 8 says that you should promote a constant and sustainable pace when you're working with Agile. And number 9 says that continuous attention to technical excellence. Basically, if you place a focus on continuous attention to technical excellence, you won't have to waste time fixing problems or fixing mistakes coming from the project itself. Number 10, simplicity is essential. So if you can do something in a simple way of doing it, don't waste time complicating it. Okay. Number 11, it says that the self-organizing team can generate most value. So for Agile, the team should be able to create a valuable product without much interaction or without much interference from the leaders or the top management, right? They should have the capability and also the authority as well to be able to handle day-to-day tasks for the project. And last but not least, it says that regularly reflects on how to become more effective. So not just for the product or the project that you're working on, we should also reflect on how we can perform better the next time in terms of productivity or in terms of efficiency. Okay, so those are the 12 principles of Agile. Okay, so in the previous slides, I've already covered basically the underpinning theory of Agile, the values and principles of Agile. So in the next slide, after this slide, you will see that I already introduced some of the frameworks and methodologies of Agile. And with those frameworks, you will also see there are some form of characteristics or features that are similar to what you see over here, such as focusing on people, working software, provide flexibility, customer involvement. So all of these features are actually derived from the values and principles of Agile. Okay. So I'll move on to the next slide. So over here, these are the frameworks of Agile. As you can see, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, Extreme Programming, DSDM, or SAFe. Okay, but it is good to know that Agile by itself, it is not a methodology because it doesn't provide a detailed plan or detailed procedure for you to follow. It just provides a set of values and principles as a guide for you to follow, right? But there are many frameworks out there, such as what I've mentioned, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, and etc. Those frameworks can help you follow the Agile principle and the Agile values. Okay, so you can see Agile here as an umbrella term for all those frameworks underneath it, or a container term for them. So on the left-hand side, we have Scrum, Kanban, Lean, and Extreme Programming. These are considered as a lighter Agile approach. Okay, and they're usually used in maybe product development or managing a smaller scale project. And on the right side, we have DSDM, or now is commonly known as the Agile Project Framework, or SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework. These are considered as a more extensive Agile approach. They are used to manage a larger scale project or projects that requires more control and a structured way of working. Then we'll use the frameworks on the right. Okay. So just to give you an idea of a comparison of differences between a lighter and extensive approach, for Scrum, we really only have 3 key roles in the Scrum framework. But for the DSDM or the Agile Project Framework, we have 13 clearly outlined roles that can represent different interests, maybe from the business interest, management interest, technical interest, and project interests. So it provides a more structured way of working, as I've mentioned. Right? So for today, we will only focus on Scrum. Basically, I'll introduce Scrum in the next slide. And for the rest of the frameworks, if you'd like to know more, you can easily find them online because these are very common Agile frameworks. But for DSDM or the Agile Project Framework, if you would like to know more, you can maybe write to us after this. Maybe we can prepare a next webinar about the Agile Project Framework. Okay. So let me first start with introducing Scrum first, and later I'll explain how Scrum actually works. So Scrum is a lightweight approach or lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solution for complex problem. When you see adaptive solution or adaptive, you can easily imagine an iterative and incremental way of working, right? So Scrum is simple and purposefully incomplete. It doesn't really provide any detailed instructions. It only provides rules that guides the relationship and interactions for the team members to follow. So it only provides the way of working for the team members to follow the Scrum framework. So it works in an iterative and incremental approach, like all of the Agile frameworks. And various processes, techniques, and methods can be employed within the framework itself. Because this is a lightweight framework, that's why it is more flexible. You can incorporate different processes or techniques with the Scrum framework. Okay. So for Scrum, there are really only 3 key roles that you should know. The first is the product owner. So the product owner essentially is a person that defines the feature of the product or what product the team needs to build. Okay, so it can be the leader of the organization or someone who wants to build something and requires the team to build it for them. Okay? And then we have the Scrum Master. Scrum Master is a servant leader of the team. He or she is tasked with the role of leading the team to ensure that the product or project can be delivered in the Agile approach. So the Scrum Master over here basically is the project manager of the team, right? He needs to ensure that the team works in the Scrum framework. Then last but not least, we have the team member. So the team member is basically any individual which is involved in the development of the product. So it doesn't really matter which department they come from. So it can be from the IT department, quality department, as long as they're involved in the development of the product, they are considered as a team member. Okay. So let me move on to the next slide. So before I explain to you how Scrum works, we also need to introduce 3 important artifacts of Scrum. So let's start with the product backlog. So the product backlog basically is a prioritized list of features or tasks that needs to be completed within the project itself. Okay. And then we have the sprint backlog. Basically, the sprint backlog is the higher prioritized list of features coming from the product backlog that needs to be completed within a sprint. Basically, a sprint is just a duration of 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks of working time. So that is what we call it as a sprint. Later, I'll explain it more in the next slide. Then last but not least, we have the product increments. Basically, by the end of the sprint, we should be able to ship or deliver product increments, maybe just a potentially shippable product or maybe just an additional feature to the whole software. Okay. So now that we have learned the key roles and also the 3 artifacts of Scrum, I'll put all of them together and explain to you how Scrum actually works. So it all starts with the product backlog, where the product owner will present the product backlog to the team. And collectively, during the sprint planning, as you can see over there, it involves the team members, the Scrum Master, and also the product owner. They will pick and select the higher prioritized list to put into the sprint backlog. Okay. So as I've mentioned, all of those lists and tasks which are in the sprint backlog needs to be completed within a given sprint. So a sprint can be either 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks. For our company, we usually work with a two-week sprint. So it really depends on how frequent or how fast you want to deliver product increments to the end user, right? So during the sprint itself, you will have daily meeting. In Scrum, we call it daily Scrum. It is basically just a 15 minutes daily meeting for the team to discuss the progress of the task, or maybe to discuss if they have any obstacles that will need help from other team members, or maybe to do necessary adjustment to the sprint backlog. Okay. And after the sprint is done, we will have the sprint review, where the team will come together to present all of the tasks that they have done to all of the team members. And then we will also have the sprint retrospective, where the team will actually think of ways of improvement, maybe to improve their productivity or to improve the way that they work, to improve the efficiency for the following sprints. So at the end of the day, after the sprint is completed, there should be product increments. or potential shippable products that you can ship or you can deliver to the end user directly. So this is basically the summarized version of how Scrum works. So I understand it's a very summarized version because you don't actually have much time to explain the detailed practices of Scrum. But if you'd like to know more, maybe we can share with you some articles, or maybe include this in the next webinar as well. Okay. So with this, actually, we are slowly coming to the end of today's webinar. So there are mainly 4 key takeaways that I would like to share with all of you. The first one is that agile way of working can help teams better respond to change and deliver value faster to the end user. Very frequently, this is one of the reasons why team and organization decided to actually adopt the agile way of working, right? And secondly, agile has its roots in software development, but they are also widely adopted in other non-software related projects. As I've mentioned earlier, you can use in maybe a HR project, maybe in a other non-software related project, doesn't really matter. And number 3, agile is basically just a set of values and principles for us to use as a guide, and there are many frameworks and methodologies to help us follow the agile mindset. Those frameworks, I have already introduced some of them in the previous slide. And last but not least, the team really first need to understand the underpinning theory of agile, basically the values and the principles of agile. And from there, only select the most suitable agile frameworks for you to adopt for your company or for your team, right? So yeah, basically these are the 4 key takeaways for today's webinar. And let me just maybe move on to the next slide. Yeah. So if you're interested to learn more about Agile or maybe any other topic, maybe big data, robotic process automation, and etc., what you can do is that you can visit firstly our Cybians Knowledge Center. We actually have a lot of articles, white papers there already for you to actually review if you're interested. You can also sign up to our newsletter. I'll highly encourage this because it is through our newsletter that's how we notify our members and also our clients that we have free webinar or we have released a new white paper. Or you can also visit our training page. Basically, in the training page, we have a lot of courses which are internationally accredited, including the Agile program itself, right? So basically with this, we have come to the end of the webinar, and maybe we can start the Q&A session already. So if you have any questions regarding what I've already explained or what I've already shared during the webinar, you can just ask questions. So I have one question from Colin. Let me project it. Oh, one second. Okay, so Colin is asking, can we say product owner is a representative of customer from the company who connect between project team and customer, or product owner has to be a third party outside the company? So basically, the product owner can be a representative of the customer. It can be that because basically it can also be a representative of a business stakeholder. Basically, the product owner needs to know or needs to communicate well to the team what they need to build, what they want at the end of the day. So anyone can be a product owner. I hope this actually answered your question. Is there any other questions from anyone? So let me see the next question we have from Julie. When is an only agile approach better than Scrum? When is an only agile approach better than Scrum? Julie, can you maybe further elaborate the question? What do you mean by that? Julie, can you hear me? But let me maybe just try to answer this question. If you're asking, if I'm correct, if you're asking actually which approach or can we actually compare different approaches to Scrum, which one is actually better? So basically, we don't actually compare it in that way. So what we should do is actually understand the underpinning theory of Agile, really understand what your team needs, and from there only select the most suitable framework for you to adopt any of the Agile frameworks. Okay. Oh, here I see the question from Julie again. So when do you only use Agile and not Scrum? So basically, what you should understand is that Scrum is actually a framework of Agile, but they are usually very easily when people say we are using Agile, they can also mean that they're using the Scrum framework. Okay, so you can't actually say when do we use the Agile and not Scrum, because Scrum essentially is an Agile framework, right? And Scrum will allow the team basically to follow the values and principles and practices that is aligned with the Agile mindset. Okay, I hope that I can answer. I've already answered your question. So, is there any other question from any of the participants? Yes, so we have another question coming from Colin. So when you mention face-to-face meeting in 12 principle, wonder if virtual meeting considered as one of it too. Yes, of course, virtual meeting can be considered as one of them. So basically, because you get to see the person face-to-face, and it can actually prevent miscommunication, especially when you're using just email and also maybe a chat system. So yes, you can consider that as a face-to-face meeting. So do I have any other questions from the participants? Any last question before we end the webinar? No? Okay. Yen, do you have anything to share?
No, I think you've moderated already all the questions. I thought it was a very interesting webinar and really gave a great in-depth overview of what Agile is all about. So I don't also see any other questions coming in. I think you've already moderated all of them. So I think it's time to close this webinar, our first one of the year. So I really would like to thank everyone for joining today. We're just 5 days in 2022, and we've already have completed the first webinar of the year. So I would like to sincerely thank Jeremy for hosting the session today. It's given a lot of new insights and a lot of very good comparisons, and I hope everyone is more familiar now with the differences between the different Agile frameworks. And if you would like to select one of them, what would be some good steps to take? So thank you so much, Jeremy, for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So we see you in the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.